Hi, everyone. I think welcome to this session. We're talking about the great digital leap forward. And I think digital transformation has been the talk of many businesses over the last few years, even though it's not a new thing. And even before, 2020, there have been many executives that have already had this change in terms of digital transformation at the forefront of their minds. I think McKinsey has a study that says 80% of executives have been concerned that their current businesses were at risk of being disrupted. And with the current COVID situation that we're in, it seems that many businesses themselves have, adopted a reactionary approach, mostly for survival, and leapfrogged into the digital realm. With businesses also in personal travel, I think temporarily halted, people staying at home, increased online purchasing. There are more people banking online, spending more time online. So I suppose in a nutshell, we have seen, many creative and different product and consumer offerings, and different ways of delivery this year. So I think while it's tempting to react to this crisis, we also want to understand how to properly roll out digital transformation and how this impacts, companies' future culture and the planning, the economic impact, and also some of the pitfalls and limitations of digital tech. And I think today we have a distinguished panel of speakers that are able to discuss these issues with us and give us some opinions on what they think where the next digital transformation is going to bring us. So I think, we constantly hear that all businesses, also from small SMEs, sole proprietors to large multinationals, are needing to continually adopt systems and processes that will give them an edge. And this year, it seems that people themselves have been watching in real time that, families, businesses, even organizations themselves have been disrupted. Restaurants, gyms, retail, even education themselves have been, thrust into finding new ways of delivering delivering their services and their products. So I think it's apparent also that businesses themselves are not the ones driving this change, but the change to digital and greater use of technology, but perhaps the consumer through the situation and the circumstance. So I think the first question probably to Varun itself is the use of technology an absolute litmus test for identifying the winners in the current market? I mean, are there some businesses that perhaps do not need to use technology?
See, what has come to fore is that everybody needs to use technology. Some of it may be in different shapes and forms. Some of them are entirely redesigning their business models. For example, insurance companies, they have to literally redesign the way, because now you do not know when you will be able to physically meet. Travel and tourism, they have to totally rethink the way things will be handled. Business travel, so there's some industries which will be changed for good, and there will never be going back to where they were. So those companies and those sectors will have to use technology to a much larger scale, versus some others, they will adapt technology. They will use this as an incentive or initiative to clean out the mess in the system, get synergies, and be a better self of theirs. So that's how I look at it. And the end of it, you will have like those two buckets: the ones which will never be same, and the ones which will be similar but better, faster, cheaper, because they will all of them, everything which used to take a lot of arguments to convince even inside the same company. So I was talking to a senior banker, and the joke was, it used to take me 3 years to convince my compliance to do this. I got this in 3 days. So nothing ever made us faster than COVID. So which is why that's how I look at these two buckets. And most companies will end up falling in one of these two buckets. And there will be, of course, shades of gray along the lines. But that's how I see the future coming along.
So I think if you talk about, these two buckets, so the companies that perhaps haven't really planned for a situation like COVID, let's say, right, Varun, where do you think they stand now? Because a lot of them are really playing catch up, aren't they?
See, the premise is those who were not planned, there are two reasons for not being planned, right? One is they could see it, but it was not like there was no urgency. They could see it, they understood it, but there was not so much urgency. And again, financial services would be one of examples there. They did not see that much of an urgency. And the second ones who did not plan were because they didn't never foresee. Because even during SARS, there was not that big a window, and it was only a Southeast Asian phenomena and Chinese phenomena. There was never a global blanket ban on movement. And last time was in 1919, and most business people and most people you would meet were not alive, or even if they were born, they were like super small kid. So nobody had seen this before. So there were people who were like just unfortunate. So I know people who started a restaurant business, for example, in January this year, and suddenly nobody can visit them, and they have put all this nice fancy interiors and everything. It's not their fault. uh, Sometimes shit happens. So I would say the first bucket is the one which is moving faster because they knew it, but they didn't have an urgency or time pressure to do it right now. The second part is the one where the things will change for good, and they were just unlucky. So, which is again, this is again two buckets. The second part are those people who are just unlucky. There's no fault per se of theirs. That's how things. I mean, Singapore, a 160-year-old retail store closed down because for a good 4 months nobody could go to the store, and the rents were piling up, and they closed. And e-commerce people who needed to buy, they bought it on e-commerce. Nobody bought it from the store because it was too risky, and it shut down. So could they have used more technology? I mean, they had an e-commerce store, but they did not have as much of a shelf. They didn't have as many. They only had products which they had in the retail store. They were putting on the e-commerce. So if I'm buying online, then I'll go to the store with the larger shelf versus smaller shelf. So that was unfortunate. So that's part of life. So that's how I see it evolving further.
Okay. I think also when we look at digital transformation, there are quite a few areas to consider as well, in terms of the business model, the processes, product development, and even culture, new leadership skills, mindset that supports, creative thinking, and even especially talent, I think, that are able to extract, social and economic value from all of this as well. So maybe to Jason, what would be the best way to scope, scale and perhaps lead this digital transformation?
Yeah, I think that's a huge question, and it's one that during COVID we've had to answer even faster. That we've seen that the requirements to move from an offline to an online world have been accelerated through from regulators, through governments, and the demands of merchants. So, building on what was said earlier about once the merchant truly moves offline in this environment, it's detriment to their health, and we've seen large brands as not on the high street anymore. So I think what we try and do is we try and break this down. I mean, it's too big to digest. So the first thing is we break it down into the people we serve, and then we break it down into the verticals that we focus on. So, and it's not something we can solve alone, to be clear. But, first of all, we look at our customer, the consumer. And the consumer, for me, is very simple what we have to deliver together. So if I'm thinking about any one of our verticals, if we think about insurance, for instance, we think about how can we create a high velocity, low friction environment with immediate understanding. I think when we look to somewhere like China and we understand the history of money market funds, we saw how something that was perceived as complex was made simple and was made available. So this mass distribution, high velocity, low friction environment. Number two, we then focus on instant gratification, that the customer can see instantly what they've invested in, what they've purchased, what is the protection that they have. And then lastly, for the customer, we focus on instant gratification, whether that is the need to have lending and that lending to be available, or is it the need to have insurance, or the need to claim for that insurance. So we allow all of our verticals to run independently. And first of all, we look at the customer paradigm of distribution, low friction, high velocity. We look at the instant gratification, instant liquidity. And then we look at how that plays on each of the verticals. But, when we look at something like a partnership in insurance, we have to both think how we're going to allow this to happen. A digital platform cannot make that digital transformation on its own. So strong industry partnerships is what we're building. I think when we look to the merchant, it's an entirely different problem. we're finding more than ever we have to specifically listen to the merchant's problem. And that merchant problem is very different depending who they serve and how they serve them. So in COVID, for instance, the challenges move less from payments and more into logistics. In the industry of food, we're seeing the challenges, how do you get something from farm to table? Whether this is a fish farm off the coast of Surabaya with food coming into Jakarta, how do you create that availability into a logistical problem that then arrives with fresh food in the right place? We then see a separate problem, which is from kitchen to table. So how do we solve this kitchen to table? Of course, working with the likes of Grab or Tokopedia for groceries, they really solve that for us. So we're seeing in each of the individual verticals, we're seeing that our SME partners, our merchants, they have very specific problems now. And there isn't unilateral ways of just solving these. So, you know, we're engaging in calls with things like the Ministry of Fisheries to understand where these new problem points are. How do we solve them digitally? Who do we partner with? How do we do this at scale? And we're really in a learning phase with this. But what really drives us, if we look at the facts, you know, over 70% of SMEs in Southeast Asia still don't have the availability of credit. So if we're going to move the supply chain, then you also have to think about how you're going to facilitate things like invoice factoring, supply chain finance, because this is going to be very different. There isn't going to be 11 layers of distribution like there often is today. There's maybe going to be 3. So then you have to create liquidity in the supply chain. So the customer focus for me is really important, and breaking that down into a way that the customer can digest at scale. Number 2 then is listening to my SME, listening to the merchant, and understanding the specific problem and how that becomes an industry problem and find partnerships for scalability. And then the other thing that we do organizationally is we allow each one of our verticals to run free. So what I don't do as a CEO is try and control the insurance vertical to work absolutely closely and synergistically with, say, lending, because I don't think that works. And they have very, very different ecosystems of partnerships to solve scalable problems.
Right. Okay. Does anyone have anything to add to that as well? No. I think also, I mean, hearing from what you said, I think there are a lot of also limits, you know, to where technology can take you, or how far we can push technology where we are at the moment. Maybe some infrastructure issues, ecosystem issues. So maybe Desmond, you can tell us, you know, what are the limits of technology in enabling, you know, transforming business capabilities, and are there any unintended, you know, consequences for organizations that perhaps rely really heavily on technology, and some potential risks for them?
Yeah, thanks, Larissa. And you know, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, as you know, opposed to Varun, for instance. You know, at data side, just to give you some perspective, or you know, the participants a perspective of what we do. We're in a process of, or rather we're in a business of providing software solutions, you know, to our clients who conduct corporate transactions like M&A, IPO, or fundraise. So in that space of the work that we do, what we have learned is that no matter how advanced our technology may be, or you know, whether in terms of having the highest form of security, or having, you know, artificial intelligence to secure the entire process, we are unable to solve for, you know, that personal face-to-face time that is required, say, in an actual merger and acquisition exercise, especially in sectors that are somewhat a bit more, you know, where relationships actually matter a bit more. So, I mean, you can imagine acquiring a manufacturing plant in the tunes of 100 million without having met the management team in person or even conducting a site visit. The completion of this kind of deals tend to be far and few between, especially in the APAC region where relationships and face time tend to matter a bit more and play a larger role in deal making. So that being said, I feel, I mean, looking at the other side of the spectrum where we may have IPOs and fundraisers, these are the type of transactions where the investment risk is deemed to be shared across multiple parties, and hence, you know, these deals tend to proceed as per planned. And we have seen, you know, this year, for instance, actually multiple IPOs have launched as per their planned timelines. And hence, you know, I think I'll actually even go as far as saying that, you know, depending on the type of corporate transactions that we embark on, for instance, if it's an IPO, the process may actually be made more efficient, because now, with utilizing technologies such as a Zoom call like we are on right now, a global roadshow, which previously would have taken 2 weeks, can now be conducted within 2 days by stacking meetings back to back, with no need to accommodate for the traveling time between different continents. So there's both a boon and a bane, but essentially just want to add some perspective as to how technology may be a limitation sometimes.
Okay.
Hey, can I just add to that? Can I just add to that? I think for me, the biggest limitation of technology is one word: empathy. It's very hard. When we try and replace empathy with technology, I think we fail. So whether that is the learning process of understanding a customer pain point, whether that is understanding the historical investment of technology of a bank or financial services partner, or whether it's the objectives of a government or a regulator, however macro or micro, the minute we move and we think that technology can replace empathy, whether that is AI or data science, I think we fail miserably. A great example of this for me is in customer support, customer excellence. That I often find companies go too far with technology. I was talking to a CEO of another business yesterday, and he shared with me that he'd gone so far with cost saving that basically somebody called in, and there was a response that was totally inappropriate to the question, and then a request to fill out a 3-page assessment of how good the call was. At which point, you're likely to have lost a customer. So I always just think that one word: if there is a high need for empathy, or if there is a need for empathy in the moment, we have to be super careful with replacing human interaction with technology. And when you come to the localization and the colloquial nature of Southeast Asia, I think one of the things that really propagates great, valuable businesses here is actually the capability of localization. It's very, as an expat, it was a tough learning curve to learn about Southeast Asia. So empathy is my word where limitations come in.
I think that's a very valid point. But I think also, regardless of how businesses may be impacted, by factors such as obviously uncertain state of economy, the competitors' growing reach, where companies sit basically on the technology scale as well. I think the end priority is always about finding the best way to bring value to the customer, right? So I think I would ask, how are organizations focusing on customer value and delivering it in an innovative way? Maybe to Dr. Vaidya.
Yeah, thanks, Larissa. And I think I was about to say something similar to what Jason spoke about in terms of empathy. I think that's where, in terms of how organizations can use technology to focus on customers more, I think at the heart of it is listening to customers better. I think while many of us talk about how these times are unprecedented for businesses, and they certainly are, but we have to remember that they're unprecedented for our customers as well. And therefore, in as much that we can't predict what will happen to our businesses, neither can the customers predict truly what their behavior is going to be. This creates a very, very interesting situation. In more certain times, let's put it that way, one is able to talk to a customer and say, what are your needs? What kind of product would you like? What changes should we make to better service you? And the customer would be able to answer based on their experience. Now, that question is insufficient because even the customer doesn't know what their needs are. So for OYO, we run a large number of hotels across Southeast Asia, and it's one thing for us to talk to customers and ask them what they would love from their favorite hotel in normal times. But in COVID times, especially when the lockdowns had begun, their answers would be, we don't know. We really don't know what right now we're not thinking of going outside our homes. When we do begin, we don't really know what we want. And so by talking to our customers constantly, but through surveys and such, which is made easier through technology, but also making use of data when lockdowns did start lifting and when customers did start going out, then we had to depend on data and technology for analyzing that data a lot, because customers would not in the beginning be able to articulate what they would be looking for in a hotel, But we soon discovered that the kind of hotels which began to have higher footfalls is the hotels which were within driving distance from cities, for example. Spots which were not tourism spots in the past suddenly became hotspots for weekend staycations, because people felt that it was safer to sit with their family in their own car, in their own vehicle, and drive door to door, so that they don't have exposure at an airport or in a flight, etc. The second thing which we learned from them is they said, well, we would like our hotels to be sanitized and clean. Said, well, that's terrific, but how would you know if a hotel was sanitized and clean? And that again is what I mean by saying really listening, because that for the first time forced our customers to think, you know what, they're right, how would we know? And so working through those answers and creating protocols, OYO has started something called the Sanitized Stay program, which depended entirely on understanding from customers what they would like. So customers would say things like, we noticed that our hands should touch minimal surfaces. So how are we going to deal with doorknobs? How are we going to make sure that there's a sanitizer right next to a doorknob? How are we going to deal with the elevator buttons in our hotels? How do we make sure that a person can check in without ever having to come within 6 feet of the receptionist who's sitting there? Also for safety of our own employees, how do you ensure that happens? So in learning with the customers, we were able to create a set of protocols which we launched called the Sanitized Stay program. And our franchisee hotels would have to demonstrate that they were adhering to this protocol for them to get tagged as a sanitized stay. Interestingly, today, hotels which are tagged with a sanitized stay on our network make 2x the revenue of the hotels which are not tagged. So clearly, listening to customers and then adapting what we're able to listen to deliver that service, I think is the biggest role that technology can play in servicing customers better. Sometimes what we hear from customers requires interventions that also require technology. For example, we created the contactless check-in experience in Indonesia. So today in Indonesia, if you're checking into an OYO hotel, you can do it much the same as you could board a flight in most airports without actually having a physical voucher of any sort. And as you're walking in through the door, you can go onto your OYO app and check in, and the key would be waiting for you at the reception. You just take it and go. Now that that kind of innovation came purely because of what we were listening to from our customers. So I think listening to customers and then using that to good effect wherever technology can provide an intervention has been our biggest learning, and I think it is the case with most businesses that I speak with.
Right. But I think also, I mean, all this is, this is adoption of technology and moving forward in I guess, I don't know, more certain times. But I think with COVID and people not traveling, business meetings basically now online and everything, and most people are staying in their houses. How are the hotels, dealing with this? Is there some sort of digital format or digital offering, that can help you keep up with.
Well, I mean, sadly, we did think about this a lot and came to a conclusion that a hotel does have to be a physical space. And therefore, at the end of the day, a human has to go from their home to another physical space, which we shall call a hotel. That we figured is no way around. But what did happen is a number of new use cases came up, which were entirely because of the COVID pandemic and the government responses to it, right? So in countries like the Philippines, in Malaysia, we actually partnered with the government to provide quarantine stay and isolation stay. So two categories of hotels, those which were isolating suspected COVID patients and those which were isolating, confirmed COVID patients. There was also a program which was launched for Filipinos and Filipinas who are coming from abroad back to the Philippines. Around the time that immigrant labor was moving back to their home country, where they required a place to quarantine. So we worked with various governments across the region quite heavily in that. We created an entire program for frontline responders. So doctors and nurses who were working in hospitals, they were not comfortable going home anymore. Not only did they have to deal with some really difficult shifts, but they didn't know if they were going to be infected, and they didn't know on a given day, they did not know if they were infected today, and they would only test positive 3-4 days later. So they did not want to go home to their families and run the risk of infecting them. So we again came up with an entire program where wherever we had hotels close to healthcare facilities, they geared up to cater to frontline workers. As lockdown started lifting and people became more willing to travel, new use cases started coming up. For example, business travel, where people do have access to Zoom and so on, that has certainly plummeted. But if you look at the kind of business travel that OYO, which is a budget hotel chain, caters to, the business people that come to us are, SMEs, small retail stores on the outskirts of a city who have to make a trip once a month into the city to buy things in wholesale. They still need to do that. They can't, in many cases, they don't have logistical solutions for that. So those kind of use cases continue for our hotels. And as I said, family staycations have gone up. Actually, during weekends, we had occupancies go up dramatically. For example, the last long weekend in Indonesia around the Eid, and that still continues within cities as well as just on the outskirts. So people are not traveling distances, but people are gradually starting to move out of their homes into a hotel, also to get relief from having to do housework for a weekend, for example. And so the use cases have changed. But the physical requirement of a person going into a hotel, sadly, we haven't found a digital replacement for that yet.
So I think back on the human factor, of digital transformation. I think Zen, will the digital revolution impose significant challenges for smaller countries in Southeast Asia, especially those that are lacking technological resources and large labor forces that might be replaced by, artificial intelligence?
Well, we cannot predict whether technology will replace human beings. We started off building robotics and try to digitize some of the process to actually assist and complement the clinicians. So the digital revolution started around the 80s with internet, with mobile devices, social networking, big data, computing, clouds. It basically revolutionized work practices in healthcare. But when we first launched it, people thought that we're going to replace them. They were defensive. But till now, we're still not replacing human beings. But the patients, however, get more autonomous, confident, and they can now get to do a lot of the self-studies without any formal education or training or support. In the 20th century, many medical educators actually believed that it was possible to address certain clinical situations. Today we know that this is not the solution for our healthcare system. In other words, we cannot replace the old model centered on the figure of the doctor or solely patient-centered model. Ideally, the near future is looking at a collaborative model where we use technologies to integrate the needs of the patients with the doctors and with the technology providers like ourselves. So the e-patients of the 21st century will have to work with the clinicians using the digital resources available. So it should be emphasized that, however, many features of the clinicians of the 20th century, such as the personal contact, the face-to-face, the clinical examination, and the emotional assessment, should continue to be present in the current practice of the medicines. So we do not think that the technologies will replace the large manpower available in countries with lack of the technical resources. We think that the re-education actually allows them to harness technology. So even though medicine or healthcare is considered a ultra-conservative area, often resistant to new changes, we can not ignore that our lives actually has been radically transformed by such digital innovations, right? We are seeing a lot of such technology being used in the healthcare sector. So I used to say it's like radically transformed, but somehow creatively destroyed. But this destruction is not possible in healthcare because for the first time in history, we're able to digitize the human beings. With digitized human beings means that we know in depth the genome. We know their vital function, we know their blood parameters, everything else that keep them alive. So we can actually digitize a lot of this information. So we're living a moment where the development of new technologies are converging the power of the ancient medicine, the traditional approach, and eventually converge into a new medicines. So this new direction will be centered in the care of people and the family, joint participation, the doctor's transfer of power, in compliance with the needs of the poor and in defense of the care to satisfy a universal human need. So much needs to be done. So from the validation of application, technologies, devices, and the methodologies, but the scientific basis, the safety, and the evidence and the cost benefit of this adoption is key. So one thing is certain, I cannot answer you whether you will replace the human being. One thing is certain, this process, there's no turning back. We will adopt technology. And I still believe that technology is just complementing the clinicians to do their job better.
Okay. I think you've also answered one of the questions from one of the audience that came in view of the COVID-19 pandemic. What is the view from technology company in medical and healthcare sector on the prospect of technology in healthcare and hospital settings? So let's move on. I think the concept of innovation is that the idea of innovation itself has to be constantly rethought and re-innovated. And this constant change, just to stay ahead, I feel, and keeping up with the constant change, even just this process of change, right, has brought about digital fatigue, I think, to many a senior executive. And I mean to myself as well for the last few years, keeping up with all the technologies available, everything that is new and up and coming. And I think to Ayumi from Pinterest, how does this affect productivity for companies? And also I think on the consumer front, right, do they experience a form of digital fatigue as well? If businesses basically are mostly going online now and sort of bombarding customers, through so many digital channels, how do they sift through this clutter, and how do companies themselves, right, avoid, I guess, cluttering the consumer?
Yeah, thanks, Larissa. Digital fatigue, I think we all know that it's not necessarily something new. I think through the past few years, we sort of seen this come up in one form or the other. But obviously this year with COVID and the lockdowns, people spending more time at home, this notion has really accelerated at a speed that I think no one had really predicted. And so, we use technology for work, we use it for personal entertainment, but now it's education. We use it for, corporate events like this. I recently signed up to like a online yoga class, which I would have never done at the pre-COVID stage, but something that I've considered now. And so, through many touch points in our day-to-day, just technology plays obviously a very important role. And there's upsides to this, right? From a consumer perspective, it could be more convenient for us, more efficient. From a business perspective, I think there are some upsides where, perhaps you can reduce costs and, bring up your ROI on certain initiatives as you transform digitally. And even, with Pinterest, we actually hit an all-time high in our engagements this year, because people were coming to the platform to look for things like, how do I set up a home office, or what should I cook for dinner tonight, or big ones being around like kids' activities, like what am I supposed to do with them at home? So craft ideas, for example. And so there has been definitely a positive upside, but I think, it's important for us to also remember that there's still only 24 hours in a day. Like that hasn't changed. But the amount of, digital touch points that we've have increased significantly. And so it can be very overwhelming for consumers. On Pinterest, we've seen an increase in searches for things like mental wellness or, meditation practices. How do you switch from online to offline as you wrap up your workday? And so I think this notion has been increasing and accelerated this year in particular. And so I think for, thinking ahead to 2021 and beyond, I really liked Dr. Mandar's point about, really listening to your consumers or your customers. And I think it's the same with digital platforms. Like it's no longer about, maximizing the amount of time spent on your platform. I think, 5-6 years ago, that could be the metric that platforms were optimizing for. And now it's more about, the quality of time spent. So if you're able to catch that consumer onto your platform for, 10-15 minutes, like how do you make that time the most valuable? How do you make it helpful, and how do you make it productive and actionable for the consumers. And I think with Pinterest, we often get bundled together with as a social media network, but actually we're not a social media at all. It's not really about connecting with people, but it's more about finding ideas and inspirations for your everyday life. So this is very true to our mission, but I think now more than ever, it's become more important to kind of go back to your consumers and your customers, really listen to what it is that they need, because what they need today is probably very different from what they needed in 2019. And figuring out what's the right value that you can provide. And again, the value that you provide could be different from 1 year ago. And so for us, it's actually about like, how do we get people from online to offline? So we actually don't want people to stay on their phones for hours and hours mindlessly scrolling, but we actually want people to find, if they're looking for a recipe, we want them to find a recipe as quickly as they can, have the ingredients in hand, and so that they can put down their phones and actually make the food, or do the activity with their kids, or decorate their home, or whatever that project may be. So kind of encouraging people to kind of shift from that online to that offline world.
Okay, that sounds quite interesting. All right, and I think, in terms of where, this panel sees digital transformation in the near future, I guess 2021 and beyond, where are the bright spots, and what does this mean for the future economy? I'm going to throw this out there to, all the panelists, and let you answer, what your opinion is and where you think, we're going to see all this transformation. So who wants to start? I guess maybe Varun?
See, broadly, the way we look at is we all will take a few months, I would say, to even realize the full impact. Right now, everybody is in the survival mode. And if the vaccine news are actually true to an extent, they are, and they start to come back where people can start to think how they will start to reoperate. I believe for next 6 months, it will be hardcore, just survive, get through this, and then we will figure out what to do next. That's my view.
Okay. Anyone else want to add something?
I think we're seeing some, I think one of the great things when I look at Western Europe, North America, in COVID, we didn't see the regulators and the industry worked as closely together, whereas, we saw with examples in Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, where fintech regulator and traditional financial services sector worked quickly and also, very cleverly to increase the velocity of dispersal, increase the risk of or decrease the risk of dispersal. I remember the government program in the UK where the government just subsidized a whole lot of food that was never reached the mouths of people that needed it. And I think in Southeast Asia, we've seen the industry move very quickly. So I think this is a great accolade to the region. The speed that the regulator is prepared to work, the government is prepared to work to try and bring industry together. And I think the size and the problem that we have here in digital transformation and financial inclusion, we all, as an industry, we need to be mature enough to overcome competition and work as an industry. I really implore us to do so more often. It's been a great learning. And, certainly to my leadership organization, to my team, to the people we work with, to our board of commissioners, I talk all the time about how do we work closely? How do we play to our strengths? How do we lead digital transformation as an industry? And so I think COVID, despite COVID, actually, this has been a really good shining light. And I've got nothing but, I guess, praise for Bank Indonesia that they've worked really quickly to move things. And so I think we should call out that COVID has caused us to work better together, and I hope we continue to do so.
Okay. We have a question actually. We have a few questions, so maybe we can sort of incorporate, some of these questions also into our answers. With the inevitable future of tech companies rising, how are you improvising and thinking up ways to improve technology to deliver more value at a reduced cost? Does anyone particularly want to answer this? Desmond, maybe?
Sorry, Larissa, if you could just help to repeat that again.
With the inevitable future of tech companies rising, how are you improvising and thinking up ways to improve technology to deliver more value at a reduced cost?
Yeah, I think, a lot of that has been discussed earlier in terms of how, we use machine learning, artificial intelligence to sort of just find out, read the data sets and deliver things that we think clients find are useful. That said, some of the panelists have mentioned earlier, a lot of it boils down to listening to our clients, boils down to, conducting surveys and polls to ensure that we are addressing the requirements and hence, adding value to the client. And oftentimes when we find that we add value to the clients, there are economies of scale and cost tends to then, be driven down in that sense. So, I cite a good example for ourselves at DataSite. Earlier in the year, we had a road plan to launch several features and several products. But along the way, we started, as we started launching these products, we started asking ourselves, the pickup rate is not where it's supposed to be. And then, how we ensuring that our clients are, sort of getting what they need from us. So we then extended it to a survey and a poll to find out exactly what are they looking at. And it's actually really simple things. Just, for instance, extending our preparation time for them to prepare their deal, for instance, on our platform. That enables them to carry out a more successful transaction and hence, then derives additional revenue for us on, any other add-on items that we could sell them. So, in a sense, I feel like, again, boils down to listening to our clients, making use of data sets to back our innovation and our investments. But that's it. That's from me.
Okay. We have another question actually. What do you think has changed in terms of the way buyers and sellers are exchanging and communicating information in the last 6 months, in the last 9 months? Jason, do you have an opinion on that?
I think data portability is a double-edged sword at the moment. You look at something, you look on some of the different programs around social platforms, data capture, data manipulation. I think there is a changing attitude from regulators and consumers and merchants to data. I think people are becoming hypersensitized to it now. What we are seeing though is I think people, what I would call more informal commerce, the commerce is becoming far more informal. I noticed here in Jakarta when we first locked down, it's like all my favorite restaurants, all where I was, they had my number, they all contacted me. Hey, here's our menu. Do you want to keep having food? Do you want us to deliver things? Do you want us to, this very informal. And what it was built on is what we talked about earlier. It was built on trust. Mm-hmm. It was like, okay, you already know me, you trust me, you already transact with me. Do you want to continue your relationship with me? Is kind of what they were saying. And most of my, what's interesting is my relationship with most of the restaurants that I used to go to in Jakarta has actually improved during COVID, but I've not been there. So I think, this informal commerce around trust and quality is rising. And it's really interesting to see how that happens. And I love personally as a customer, I love that how informal that is. And I love the fact that they'll do things for you. I had a couple of people over for a business meeting and asked one of the restaurants to help me with some food. They did such a wonderful job. They really went the extra mile, and you just think, wow, what a privilege. So I'm, whether it's somebody repairing something, whether it's food, whether it's this, I love this new enriched experience around trust and quality. And I think that's rising. And I'd love to see how this really changes the way we do commerce as consumers. I'm talking not as a CEO, just as a customer, and the things I've really enjoyed during COVID.
Do you think, though, that this is perhaps a situational, short-term sort of issue, you know, rather than when people start going back to restaurants, start going back out again, that, you know, maybe businesses may get a little bit complacent in terms of the communication?
I think our customers and our staff are all going to demand a new way.
Right.
You know, certainly, you know, we hold town halls now every 2 weeks. We communicate to our entire workforce, all of our teammates, every 2 weeks. We update them on our performance, on key governance issues. We communicate with our teammates more than we've ever done before. And I think they demand that, and I think that will stay. The balance, the life-work balance, the traveling in congested cities is something people don't want to do anymore. They want more balance working from home. They want more choice. And I think the same will happen with the consumer. I think the new norm isn't just about working. I think the new norm in commerce as well. You know, quality is a big thing now. You know, I talk about fresh produce. I've never realized how important fresh produce is until COVID, because in Southeast Asia, one of the things that I've learned is I eat more fresh food than I've ever done in my life. Fresh food, you know, mango season right now, great, beautiful fruit on your table. But how do you access that? How do you deliver that in a quality assured way? You know, there's a local guy just literally 200 meters from my apartment, brings a box to my house every Monday full of fantastic food, and I send him the money on over. What a fabulous relationship. That's kind of like going back in time, though. You remember, you know, some people on this call, I'm sure, remember vegetable vans arriving at front doors and delivering bottles of pulp and vegetables. I'm showing my age now. But you know, things are kind of going full circle, and people are looking for quality. Not necessarily high price, because it doesn't necessarily mean high price. So how do you, you know, I think there's going to be greater demands on technology to allow this personalism, this trust, and the quality of product.
It's interesting that you say that. So we're going a little bit with digital. It goes a bit back to basics as well, doesn't it? Which actually leads to the next question, possibly for, you know, Zen, I think. It says, with a possible vaccine on the horizon, and as people start to travel and come out of their homes, meaning they go more offline, do you think this could lead to lower digital touch points and lower online engagements with consumers? I know Jason's touched upon, you know, quite a lot of it, but perhaps you can add your opinion as well.
Well, we actually seen that, you know, the COVID-19 definitely changed the whole scene and the face of healthcare. Coming from my industry, right? So we are seeing adoption of technology actually increased, particularly like tele rehab and using technologies to actually complement some of the activities that we traditionally use human intervention. And one thing for sure is that once you get used to using technology, just like now we're using Zoom, right? In my company, we are using so many Zoom meetings. We are actually having more meetings than before the COVID-19. So we believe that the patients actually, when they get used to it, they will continue to adopt technology whenever possible. The convenience of it, you know, if you have minor ailments, is it necessary warrant for you to travel, drive, or take a public transport and, you know, take a queue to consult? Perhaps, you know, at home, you can still enjoy the kind of diagnosis and the assessment. So data and surveys have shown that 78% of the respondents just from Asia have said that they're ready to use digital healthcare compared to 66% globally. So Asians are very forthcoming towards technology. Just like now we have the smartphone, right? If I say, Larissa, I take back your smartphone, I give you back the good old time Nokia 6210. You say, come on, you're kidding me, right? So once you get used to the convenience of technology, even in healthcare, it's difficult to turn back.
Right. Okay. Does anyone else have something to add to that as well?
I think, speaking as a medical doctor for a second, I think another very critical, aspect of what Zen mentioned, not only will patients want to continue meeting or seeing the healthcare providers online, If I look at my 20 best friends from medical school who continue to practice, and I gave up a long time ago, I moved towards business. But 6 months ago, I mean, this technology has been around for 10 years. You could, chat on the phone and, send photographs 5 years ago with wonderful high resolution photos, right?
Mm-hmm.
5 years ago, even 9 months ago, all my friends would have said, absolutely not. No doctor worth his metal will actually see patients online. That's for the doctors who can't really run a good practice, or for paramedics to do, right? But now 100% of them are seeing their patients online because they want to be safe as well. And when I ask them, what will you do when you no longer need to do it, when it's okay, they say, hey, I'm now beginning to get used to seeing my family much more, and my children see me much more, and I don't want to go back to that. So it's on both sides. I think in my past life as a consultant, I worked a lot in healthcare, and the tough thing was never to convince the patients. It was always to convince the doctors to actually see patients online, and even that barrier has been broken. I mean, if you can get a doctor to type on a keyboard instead of write on a writing pad, you can do anything. And that has happened during this pandemic.
That's an interesting concept. So I think with more and more data coming into this world, right, how can we more intelligently and meaningfully process and use this information to improve our businesses and our lives? It's quite a broad question, but maybe Desmond, something you want to answer?
Yeah. And I just think we put this in quite a detail as well, just to mention that it's great to rely on technology and data, but often, in doing so, by just looking at the full data set, it might lead to a loss of critical thinking or loss of empathy. We often do that. I mean, just a very good example is that if you were to call up your mobile service operator today, the hotline, you would be probably going through 4 to 5 default menus before you get to your actual issue. And you may not get to speak to an actual person to resolve that issue as well. So I think at the end of the day, it's just important for us to understand the fundamentals of our business and understand what's truly driving demand and customer satisfaction. And that might be that might be a variety of things that we need to do. For instance, surveys, polls, combined with the analytics and the results and AI, or the data mining that we have, right? Combine all that together to derive a solution that would perhaps be a best fit. Yeah, but I don't think we should use it in entirety. It should always be a combination, a bit of an emotion or a human factor in it, just to ensure that we take into account empathy, as mentioned very much heavily by Jason and Dr. Mandar earlier.
Mm-hmm. So I think the theme seems to that we still need people, and we still need to be a bit kind to some of these people as well, which I think is a good thing. I think we have a comment actually probably for Ayumi, and it says that I think removing digital clutter is more important to the consumer than ever before. So we started out with these limitlessly abundant inboxes, and now we are fed up. Wish we had an algorithm to reduce online life. Do you have any comment to that? I mean, is there an algorithm to reduce online life?
I wish I had it, and then I could make some good money out of it potentially. No, I do agree with this comment, and I think we've talked a lot about listening to your consumers and your customers, but I think for people in leadership positions, it's also important to listen to your employees as they go through this time. I think digital fatigue is in a workplace too, right? You work from home all day long, and then you just leave your room and have dinner. And then you have your phone sitting next to you and you still see emails pop up. And so I think it is important to kind of work with your team and figure out, like, how do you, for those who are still working from home, like, how do you make that break between, the work mode versus home mode when you don't have the commute happening in between. I know, with our team, it's a bit hard to do in Singapore, but we also talked about doing like one-on-ones while you're taking a walk outside. Probably can't do that midday, but maybe towards the end of the day. So instead of sitting in front of your laptop, the screen and all of that, just take your phone, do a traditional phone call, kind of back in the days, and have a chat with your team as you're kind of, walking around your place or something. I think it is some of these little things, behavioral changes that we'll need to make in order to kind of be in this for the long haul. Parts of Asia is looking a little bit better, but if you look at Western Europe or the US, situation is not too great. And so I think it is important to find these, seemingly small things like, taking a phone call instead of a VC as a way to sort of manage your mental health. And yeah, just kind of make it more sustainable versus, the sprint mode that we were previously in.
Okay. Fantastic. And I think, we have probably time for a last question and this probably goes out to everybody. Given that most of you are increasingly harnessing technology in your business, do you think this changes your outlook towards the growth of your company? Is this any different how you thought of growth pre-COVID? Does anyone want to start?
I don't mind going. I think with a sort of a macro system shock of this nature, right? I think everything that a business does in terms of peeping into the future has to change, and that includes growth as well. I can't imagine that there's any organization out there that hasn't begun to think differently about the future. I actually think there are two parameters in particular which govern this change. I don't think companies per se would change their ambitions, but I think there would be two different aspects to how they would want to go after these ambitions. I think the first one is that use cases and therefore customer segments and business segments which you choose to prioritize would definitely change. So if I speak of hospitality, for example, it is clear that long stays, home stays, and local and domestic leisure travel, those are the kinds of things which are going to emerge from this earlier. And I actually think that home stays and long stays will emerge stronger and bigger than pre-COVID once the COVID crisis is over. I think more and more people will want to stay in home stays rather than in hotels going forward. We are certainly seeing that currently. So for each business, there may be different segments, this being an example where you focus on compared to pre-COVID. I think the other difference is that I think all businesses would say that revenue, the top line, is certainly a lot more uncertain now than it ever was before. And therefore, the importance of the bottom line or the cost in terms of how you think about growth has just gone up several notches, because cost is something that a business can control much better compared to revenue. So that does not mean that you stop doing things to enhance demand and capture consumer demand. You still do those things, but in the way that you anticipate what comes of it, you now begin to think much more about the macro environment, because fact is, even though let's say the Pfizer vaccine that has come out is actually 90% successful, by the time it is distributed, by the time it is actually delivered into the blood of thousands and thousands of people, and consumer behavior changes post that, it's at least 6, 9, 12 months away. Until that time, there's many countries which are going to go in and out of lockdowns, and therefore any predictions on the top line are going to be fraught with danger. So I think these are the two ways in which organizations' idea of growth will change, which segments they focus on for growth and how much they value cost over the top line.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else to add to that as well? No? So I think maybe with that, does anyone else?
I was just going to say that I think we were in such a growth mentality. Grow lending, grow payments, grow insurance, grow the company. And I think what it's changed is we've focused on the people we already serve, and we're more focused on serving them better. That to me is, that's no bad thing at this point in our life. I think all companies do that, where you're growing, you're consolidating, you're growing, consolidating. I think it allowed us to really focus back on our customer. And, I'm using the word empathy today because I'm using it a lot in my business, with my business leaders and managers, of really, have empathy with the people. when we think about the things we're doing, we're raising money for a charity at the moment that is struggling for the very basics to serve children in a home. We're trying to, okay, how do we serve you? How do we solve this? So we're really trying to serve our customers better, serve the people that have already, have already helped us grow and create a household name in Indonesia. We should serve them. We should do a better job for them. And so I feel very passionately about this, that we should serve our customers better.
Okay. There's that's a good point. Anything else anyone want to add to just that comment? No? So I think that, we've sort of run out of time. This has been a fantastic discussion. And I think I just want to, thank all the speakers for joining us, and maybe leave you with a thought that, the measure of a civilization really is not the tools it owns, but, the use it makes of them. And I think, when we talk about empathy, we talk about the people, we talk about use of technology, we need to think of all aspects of not just implementing technology moving forward but how it also impacts us in society as well. So with that, thank you very much for joining us.